What if the most transformative years of Jesus' life, the years that shaped his mission, deepened his wisdom, and prepared him for the path that would change the world, were never recorded in Scripture? Has this ever crossed your mind? Imagine opening the pages of the Bible and finding a gap so vast that it skips nearly 2 decades of his life, a silence that begins when he's just 12 years old, standing in the temple, astonishing the elders with wisdom far beyond his years, and ends when he reappears at the age of 30, ready to be baptized and begin his ministry. What happened in those missing years? Why do the records go silent at the very moment when the boy was becoming the man, when the student was transforming into the teacher? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you and maybe even change the way you see Jesus forever. For centuries, scholars, believers, and seekers alike have wondered, did Jesus simply remain in Nazareth, living quietly as a carpenter's son, hidden in the obscurity of small-town life? Or did he walk roads far beyond Judea, guided by a higher calling that took him into lands and traditions foreign to the people of his homeland? The Scriptures give us only the briefest glimpse of the boy Jesus, his presence in the temple so commanding that learned elders stopped to listen, and then silence. No stories, no lessons, no miracles, just absence. It's as if history drew a curtain over the most formative stage of his life. But why? Was it chance, or was there something about those years so profound, so challenging to the established narrative, that they remained hidden between the lines of history? This mystery has captivated the hearts of truth-seekers for generations, and while official records may remain silent, ancient traditions, spiritual intuitives, and the trance readings of Edgar Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, offer a different picture, a picture of a young man traveling far beyond the borders of Judea, seeking wisdom from sages in India, learning the laws of compassion and karma, absorbing the deep inner practices that would one day flow into his teachings, a picture of someone who, long before the Sermon on the Mount, was already being shaped by spiritual encounters that spanned continents and cultures. Think about it. If these lost years were indeed spent in sacred training, then what we know of Jesus is only half the story, and the other half may be even more extraordinary. Could it be that the very foundations of his message, love, forgiveness, the oneness of all life, were tempered and enriched by wisdom drawn from the ancient temples of Egypt, the mystical schools of the East, and the age-old prophecies of distant lands? Stay with me, because the silence of those 18 years may not be silence at all. It may be the hum of preparation, the quiet forging of a soul into the perfect vessel for the Christ consciousness. And if that's true, then the story we've been told is not incomplete. It's waiting to be completed. In the next moments, we're going to peel back the layers of time and tradition, following the clues left in history, legend, and spiritual insight to uncover what might have happened between the temple at 12 and the baptism at 30. And as we do, you might find that this journey isn't just about discovering where Jesus went, it's about discovering something hidden within yourself. So let's take the first step, that silence in the narrative, the one stretching from a boy of 12 to a man of 30, is almost deafening when you stop to think about it. It's not just a missing chapter in history, it's a vast space where transformation could have been quietly taking place, out of the public eye. Those 18 years are like a sealed vault, holding the hidden truth of how a young man might evolve from a gifted child into a spiritual figure whose presence would alter the course of human thought. Behind the scenes of recorded scripture, something was unfolding, and the more you imagine it, the more that absence starts to feel intentional rather than accidental. Was Jesus shaping wood in a carpenter's shop day after day, living the predictable rhythm of village life, or was every step, every decision, part of a larger journey? 1. Designed to prepare him for a mission that would require not just faith, but resilience, clarity, and an unshakable sense of purpose. The mindset required for what he would later face couldn't have been forged overnight. It suggests a period of immersion, of seeking, of absorbing wisdom wherever it could be found. Think about the impact of those unspoken years. Any life-changing calling demands more than talent. It demands preparation that touches every layer of a person's being. It's the same in our own lives. The moments of quiet, the seasons where nothing seems to be happening, often carry the deepest transformations. They're the behind-the-scenes rehearsals for something greater. If that's true for us, how much more profound might it have been for someone whose destiny was to become a living example of compassion, truth, and inner strength? There's a certain weight to the idea that he might have sought out knowledge beyond the boundaries of his homeland, that perhaps he walked unfamiliar roads, listened to foreign tongues, stood in temples whose teachings challenged and expanded his understanding. A purposeful spiritual odyssey would explain not only the depth of his later teachings, but the universal tone that seemed to transcend culture, religion, and geography. It would mean that what we hear in his words isn't bound to one tradition, but carries echoes of multiple paths woven together. And here's where the mystery deepens. Because if those 18 years were about preparing, then what he carried back with him wasn't just religious doctrine, but a refined consciousness. It's the kind of preparation that goes beyond study. It reshapes a person from the inside out. He would have returned not only with knowledge, but with the quiet authority of someone who has tested, lived, and integrated the truths he would later share. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, to explore how such a journey, hidden in plain sight, might hold clues not only about his path but about the process of becoming ready for our own higher purposes. It's in the subtle details, the choices made far from the crowd, that the real foundation is built. And sometimes, those are the very moments history forgets to record. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." According to Edgar Cayce, those years of silence weren't empty at all. They were sacred ground. He described them as a time of deliberate preparation, a period where every experience, every encounter, was part of shaping a man into the vessel of something far greater than himself. In Cayce's view, the so-called missing years were not missing at all, but carefully woven into the soul's journey, like threads of gold hidden in a tapestry that only reveal themselves under the right light. Cayce, often called the sleeping prophet, entered trance states where the boundaries between past and present seemed to dissolve. In those altered states of consciousness, he gave over 14,000 readings, vivid, detailed glimpses into lives, places, and events that often aligned with ancient wisdom traditions. Among these were accounts of Jesus' path, not just as the Messiah we know from the Gospels, but as a seeker, a traveler, and a student of the deepest spiritual truths the ancient world had to offer. Imagine the mindset it would take for someone destined for such an immense role to step beyond the safety of what was familiar. Cayce's revelations speak of journeys across continents, crossing deserts and mountains, entering lands where the customs, languages, and beliefs were entirely different. These weren't wanderings without purpose. Each destination carried its own lesson. Each teacher offered a new way of seeing the world, and each sacred site left an imprint on the consciousness of the young man who would one day stand before crowds and speak of love, forgiveness, and unity. Behind the scenes of recorded history, there was an unfolding transformation, one that couldn't be rushed or confined to a single tradition. Cayce described how these travels exposed Jesus to a spectrum of spiritual knowledge, from the mystical disciplines of the East to the sacred rites preserved in the temples of Egypt. This was not a rejection of his roots, but an expansion of them, a willingness to integrate truths from many paths into a single, harmonious vision. It's a reminder that the greatest journeys often happen away from the public eye. While the world saw nothing, profound shifts were taking place. The quiet years were not about inaction. They were about inner construction, the kind of building that doesn't rely on stone or wood, but on decisions, discipline, and a deepening connection to the divine. Cayce's accounts suggest that the man who emerged at the Jordan River was the result of those years of silent labor, not just in skill or knowledge, but in the alignment of every part of his being with the mission ahead. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because what Cayce revealed about these hidden years challenges the way we think about preparation and purpose. It invites us to see that the most powerful transformations often happen where no one is watching, and that the hidden truth behind a person's impact is often found in the chapters the world overlooks. Put down, I'm also on this path. Cayce's reading, 5749-2, paints a vivid picture, not of a passive figure waiting for destiny to arrive, but of a determined traveler, moving through distant lands with the hunger of a true apprentice. These weren't symbolic journeys meant only to inspire. They were real, physical paths across deserts, mountains, and oceans, where each step carried him into contact with new wisdom and unfamiliar ways of seeing the divine. This mindset of seeking, of refusing to be limited by the boundaries of birthplace or tradition, was central to the transformation he was undergoing. Among the most striking revelations is his time in India. Cayce described him not as a stranger there, but as someone who resonated so deeply with the spiritual climate that he was recognized as a radiant teacher, even in his youth. Imagine the impact of walking into ancient temples where chants echoed through the air, where the teachings of compassion, karma, and inner awareness had been refined over centuries. This wasn't about abandoning his roots. It was about expanding them, weaving threads of understanding from multiple traditions into a single tapestry of truth. India offered him more than philosophical concepts. It offered practices, the discipline of meditation, the conscious directing of thought and intention, the understanding that the inner world shapes the outer. These weren't abstract ideas. They were living realities. And for someone who would one day speak of the kingdom of God being within, such lessons would have been more than inspiring. They would have been essential. There's something powerful about this image of Jesus as a learner, before he was a leader. It's a hidden truth often overlooked, that greatness is rarely born fully formed. It grows in the quiet moments, in the questions asked, in the humility to sit at the feet of those who know more. Behind the scenes, before the sermons and the crowds, there was a young man absorbing the wisdom of sages, testing it against his own experience, and shaping a worldview that would one day feel both revolutionary and deeply familiar to those who heard it. And the journey didn't stop there. Cayce's accounts suggest that India was a beginning, a place where seeds were planted, but not the only soil in which they would grow. Just as a traveler collects not only sights but insights, he carried forward the lessons of compassion and karma into the next phase of his preparation. Each land would offer something different. Each culture would challenge and refine his understanding, until all of it could be brought together into a single, harmonious vision of humanity's connection to the divine. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when you trace the path of these travels, you begin to see that they weren't just about gathering knowledge, they were about becoming the embodiment of it. And that changes everything about how we understand the man who stepped into the waters of the Jordan years later. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." In Cayce's account, the image of Jesus in India is not one of a distant, untouchable figure, but of a young seeker sitting cross-legged among sages, listening intently, asking questions, and embracing the discipline it takes to truly learn. There was no arrogance, no sense that his own destiny excused him from the patient work of study. Instead, he approached each teaching with humility, testing it against the truth already stirring in his heart. This willingness to absorb, to integrate rather than reject, became a hallmark of his growing understanding, an understanding that would later resonate with people from all walks of life because it was born from many paths, not just one. That openness to wisdom beyond the borders of his birthplace was part of what made his mindset so rare. It wasn't about collecting ideas for the sake of knowledge. It was about transformation through lived experience. Each encounter with a mystic, each moment of stillness in a temple courtyard, added another layer to the foundation he was building within. The compassion of the East, the concept of karma, the awareness of the inner self, all of these were quietly becoming part of his spiritual DNA. But his journey didn't end with the mountains and rivers of India. According to Cayce, he traveled westward to the sands of ancient Egypt, a land where spiritual tradition was woven into the very fabric of its monuments. He didn't arrive as a tourist dazzled by the sight of colossal structures. He came as a student, seeking the hidden truth preserved in the sacred mysteries of the temples. Egypt at that time still carried remnants of a knowledge so ancient that even the priests who guarded it treated it as a living bridge between the human and the divine. In these temples, initiation wasn't simply a ritual to observe, it was an ordeal to endure. Cayce described Jesus undergoing purification rites in the Great Pyramid itself, a place he referred to as a temple of initiation. These rites were symbolic death and rebirth, designed not to break the body, but to awaken the soul. The mindset required to submit to such trials was not one of casual curiosity. It was the mindset of someone determined to strip away every illusion, to stand fully aligned with the truth, whatever it demanded. Picture the stillness of those inner chambers, lit only by flickering flames, the air heavy with incense, and the presence of priests guiding each step of the process. This was preparation in its most intense form, an environment designed to confront the initiate with the depths of their own consciousness. For Jesus, it was not about spectacle or status, but about refining himself into the perfect vessel for the message he would one day carry to the world. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when you follow the thread from the quiet courtyards of India to the shadowed corridors of Egypt's temples, you begin to see a journey that was not random, but deliberately shaped to forge the strength, clarity, and presence that would define everything he became. Put down. I am also on this path. Inside the Great Pyramid, the air would have been heavy with stillness, the kind that makes every sound feel amplified, every breath deliberate. Cayce described these rites as more than ceremonial tradition. They were designed to push the initiate beyond the limits of the mind, to strip away everything that wasn't aligned with truth. For Jesus, this meant surrendering to a process that symbolized death, not in the body, but in the layers of identity and ego that could stand in the way of his purpose. Emerging from such an experience was like stepping into a new state of consciousness, carrying a clarity that only comes when the old self has been shed. The symbolic sarcophagi were not coffins for the dead, but vessels for transformation. Inside them, the initiate would lie in complete darkness, guided inward to face the deepest parts of the self. This was the heart of the ancient mystery school initiations, a journey into the inner world so profound that it would leave permanent changes in the way one perceived life, the divine, and the role of the soul in the unfolding of destiny. The priests who oversaw these rites were not simply performing rituals. They were guardians of a spiritual technology meant to awaken the eternal memory within the human spirit. It's a hidden truth that the most powerful initiations often look like nothing from the outside. There are no grand audiences, no applause, no public recognition. Instead, they happen in silence, in darkness, in spaces where the only thing you can face is yourself. That is where real transformation happens, in the moments where you are confronted by your own doubts, fears, and attachments, and must choose whether to hold on to them or let them go. For Jesus, this was a preparation unlike any other. It was not about learning new information, but about embodying it so completely that it became part of who he was. When Cayce spoke of these experiences, it was clear that they were essential. Steps in aligning mind, body, and spirit into perfect unity. Such alignment is rare, even among the most dedicated seekers, because it demands absolute honesty and the willingness to be reshaped from the inside out. The impact of these rites wasn't just personal. They were the final sharpening of a presence that would later move crowds not through force, but through an undeniable sense of authenticity. People would feel it before they understood it, the quiet authority of someone who had faced the deepest trials without breaking. And that authority wasn't imposed from outside. It radiated from within, the natural result of walking through symbolic death and emerging into spiritual rebirth. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the journey from the stillness of the sarcophagus to the wide-open world beyond Egypt marks a turning point, one that reveals just how intentional every step of his preparation truly was. Write in the comments, "This makes sense to me." The trials Jesus faced in those sacred spaces were never diversions from his purpose. They were the very furnace in which his purpose was forged. Every ordeal acted like a refining fire, burning away what was unnecessary, sharpening what was essential, and leaving him with a clarity that could only come through lived experience. It's easy to imagine that such preparation would be purely physical or intellectual, but the truth is that these moments were profoundly emotional and spiritual as well. They tested his resilience, his patience, and his ability to hold unwavering focus on a calling that was still, at that time, unfolding. From Egypt, Cayce's readings hint at a path that may have carried him eastward again, but this time into the lands of ancient Persia. At the time, Persia was a cradle of rich spiritual philosophy, deeply rooted in the teachings of Zoroastrianism. Here, the idea of life as a battleground between light and darkness wasn't just metaphorical, it was the foundation of their worldview. The recognition that every decision we make tips the balance toward one or the other would have resonated powerfully with someone preparing to step into a mission that would demand constant moral clarity. In Persia, the concept of personal responsibility was not merely a moral suggestion, it was an unshakable law of existence. Each thought, each action carried weight, contributing either to the triumph of light or to the advance of shadow. For Jesus, these teachings would not have been foreign. They would have felt like pieces of a larger truth he was already beginning to assemble. They reinforced the understanding that spiritual transformation is inseparable from conscious choice, and that the path of service is not walked by accident but by deliberate, daily commitment. Behind the scenes, these encounters were expanding his internal map of the divine. The wisdom of Persia, like the compassion of India and the mysteries of Egypt, became part of a growing mosaic, each tradition adding depth, each lesson shaping the mindset of a man who would one day speak across cultures, transcending the boundaries that divided them. This was not about adopting new labels or identities. It was about recognizing the unity behind all sincere spiritual pursuit. The hidden truth is that his mission was never meant to be the property of a single people or place. The universality of his message was born from the universality of his preparation. By walking these roads, by immersing himself in these diverse teachings, he was crafting a vision of humanity's potential that reached far beyond the narrow definitions of tribe, language, or religion. That vision would later challenge systems, inspire movements, and continue to echo through centuries, not because it belonged to one tradition, but because it belonged to all. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because tracing this journey through different lands and philosophies reveals not just where he went, but how. Each step shaped the very core of the message he would one day give to the world. Write in the comments, "I'm also on this path." In Persia, the teachings went beyond philosophy and moral responsibility. Cayce described how Jesus would have encountered the idea of a coming savior figure, the Saoshyant, destined to bring renewal and restore balance to the world. This wasn't just an abstract prophecy, it was a deeply rooted cultural expectation, woven into the spiritual identity of the people. For someone already walking a path of preparation, hearing such a vision would have been like recognizing a reflection of his own inner calling. It wasn't that he adopted a new identity from it, but rather that it resonated with something his soul had known long before. The awareness that his mission would involve not just teaching, but embodying a pattern of restoration. This alignment with ancient prophecy may have been affirming, but it also came with weight. In some places, those with spiritual insight might have sensed who he was or who he could become, honoring him as a figure long foretold. In other regions, he would pass quietly, moving unnoticed through markets and villages. His presence felt only by those attuned to subtle currents of the spirit. Traveling under different names, he was sometimes welcomed into sacred circles, and other times simply observed, an unassuming wanderer whose depth could only be perceived by those looking beyond the surface. There's something significant in that duality, being both recognized and hidden. It speaks to a deliberate choice, a mindset of humility and discernment. To step fully into the role too soon could have altered the journey, drawing attention before the foundation was complete. Remaining unseen allowed him to keep gathering, keep learning, keep refining, without the interference of premature acclaim or expectation. It was a kind of protection, a way to ensure that his preparation unfolded exactly as it needed to. Behind the scenes. Each encounter was shaping his understanding of how the divine works through human history. The expectations of a redeemer taught him about the hopes people carried, the longing for liberation and renewal that transcends culture and time. And perhaps it also showed him the dangers, that such expectations can lift someone to the heights of reverence, or weigh them down with the burden of human projection. Navigating that tension would require not only spiritual clarity, but also a deep compassion for the very people whose dreams he would one day fulfill in ways they might not expect. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because these moments of recognition and anonymity, of walking both in the light of prophecy and the shadow of secrecy, reveal a hidden truth about preparation. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens in the spaces where the world is not yet watching. Put down. This makes sense to me. These travels, as Cayce described, were never simply about crossing borders on a map. They were about aligning the deepest parts of the soul with the rhythm of divine purpose. Every step on foreign soil was a step inward, an adjustment of the inner compass toward the true north of his mission. Geography was only the surface. What mattered was the transformation taking place beneath it, the subtle shifts in awareness, the sharpening of discernment, and the quiet deepening of his connection to the source that guided him. This kind of alignment isn't achieved through chance encounters or casual curiosity. It demands intentional movement, decisions that place you in the right situations for growth, even when those situations challenge your comfort or your understanding. For Jesus, each land was like a mirror reflecting a different aspect of the divine: compassion in one place, wisdom in another, discipline in yet another. When woven together, these experiences created a harmony that would later resonate in every teaching, parable, and act of service. Cayce's readings added another layer to this picture by connecting these years of preparation to something far older, the echoes of other lives lived before. He spoke of Jesus as having incarnated previously as Enoch, Melchizedek, and even Adam. In each of these lifetimes, the soul carried forward fragments of divine memory, pieces of a much larger pattern. This wasn't reincarnation as a cycle without meaning. It was purposeful, each existence building upon the last, refining the ability to carry the weight of a mission that spanned not just years, but ages. To see it this way changes the perspective entirely. It means the journey from India to Egypt to Persia wasn't the start of his preparation. It was the continuation of a process that had been unfolding across centuries. Each incarnation had left behind both lessons and unfinished work, and the missing years we often wonder about were in many ways the final stage of that long, intricate unfolding. It also means that his alignment with divine purpose wasn't something he stumbled into at 30. It was the culmination of choices, disciplines, and inner work carried over lifetimes. Behind the scenes, this offers a hidden truth about transformation. What we often view as sudden awakenings are more often the visible results of years, or even lifetimes, of quiet, unseen preparation. The impact that would later ripple out from his life was possible because the foundation was so deeply and deliberately set. Every teacher he met, every sacred site he entered, every challenge he faced was part of calibrating that alignment until it was unshakable. Now I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding these layers of preparation, both in this lifetime and in the echoes of lifetimes past, reveals how purpose is rarely a moment of arrival, but a journey shaped by everything that came before. Put down, "I'm also on this path." Those so-called missing years were anything but empty. They were sacred chapters, carefully written in places and moments the world was never meant to witness in full. To view them as a gap is to misunderstand the nature of deep transformation. This was not a pause in his story, it was the heartbeat of it. Every encounter, every discipline, every revelation was part of a seamless thread in the unfolding of his soul's purpose. The silence in the written record doesn't mean absence. It means mystery, and mystery often guards what is most valuable until the right time. By the time he returned at the age of 30, Jesus was not the same young man who had once stood in the temple at 12. He had walked ancient roads worn smooth by generations of seekers, absorbed the resonance of chants that had echoed for centuries, and stood within sacred walls that were designed to align human consciousness with the eternal. His grounding was not theoretical, it was embodied. It was the kind of wisdom that comes only from living truth, not just studying it. This grounding was multi-layered, from the compassion and self-awareness cultivated in the East, to the disciplined transformation of the Egyptian mysteries, to the moral clarity and cosmic vision learned in Persia. He carried within him a synthesis of the most profound spiritual traditions of his time. These were not competing truths. They were facets of a greater whole, and he had done the inner work required to integrate them into one harmonious vision. The man who stepped back into Judea at 30 did not return to simply pick up where the story had left off. He returned as someone who had been refined by both the fire of trial and the quiet shaping of the soul. His mindset was steady, his inner vision unshakable. He knew who he was, not because of external titles or recognition, but because the journey itself had revealed it to him in ways no audience or accolade ever could. Behind the scenes, this is the part of the journey most people overlook, the years where nothing public happens, yet everything essential is taking place. The hidden truth is that preparation often looks like obscurity from the outside, but on the inside, it's a process of becoming so aligned with your purpose that when the moment comes, you are ready without hesitation. That readiness is not born in the spotlight. It is forged in the unseen. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the return at 30 was not a sudden transformation, but the natural emergence of a soul that had been steadily, intentionally shaped for the mission ahead. Put down, "This makes sense to me." His return to Judea was not just a geographical homecoming. It was the closing of one cycle and the opening of another. Cayce's descriptions make it clear that this moment marked the fulfillment of spiritual patterns set in motion long before his birth. Through years of deliberate preparation, he had released the weight of what no longer served his path and gathered, like a careful craftsman, the precise tools his mission would require. The compassion cultivated in the East, the discipline honed in Egypt, the clarity and moral vision shaped in Persia, all of it had been distilled into a quiet but unshakable readiness. By the time he stood on the banks of the Jordan, there was no hesitation. The years behind him had been a journey inward as much as outward, a process of aligning thought, emotion, and spirit until there was no division between them. This wasn't simply a man returning, it was a soul stepping into the exact moment it had been preparing for across lifetimes. The baptism by John was not a ritual for appearances or tradition's sake. It was a moment of perfect alignment, where the Christ consciousness, the pure, universal awareness of unity with the divine, merged fully with his human form. The waters didn't cleanse him. They bore witness to a union already complete. In that instant, the invisible work of decades crystallized into a presence so tangible that those nearby could feel it. And as Cayce revealed, the voice from heaven was not merely an external sign to the crowd, but also a deep, inward resonance that confirmed, beyond any doubt, the harmony between divine purpose and the vessel prepared to carry it out. This was ignition, not of ambition or earthly authority, but of the mission itself. From that point, everything he would say and do would flow from a place of integration. There was no separation between message and messenger, between teaching and living. That is the hidden truth behind the power people felt in his words. They came from someone who had walked the journey, faced the tests, and emerged whole. Behind the scenes, this is the culmination of the kind of transformation most people never see. It is the reward of patience, of choices made in silence, of the discipline to keep shaping oneself long before the moment of recognition arrives. And when that moment finally comes, it doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like the continuation of something inevitable. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because the fusion of the divine and human at that baptism wasn't just an event in his life, it was the living proof of what alignment can achieve, and it carries implications far beyond his own story. Put down, "I'm also on this path." Cayce's reading 2067-7 adds a depth to the baptism scene that often goes unnoticed. The voice from heaven, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased," is usually portrayed as an external proclamation, something for the crowd to hear. But Cayce revealed that its most profound impact was inward. It wasn't simply an announcement to those standing on the riverbank, it was a direct resonance within Jesus himself, a vibration that moved through every layer of his being. It was the sound of recognition, the moment when the soul hears its own name spoken by the source from which it came. This was not validation in the human sense. It wasn't about approval or reassurance. It was ignition, the unmistakable spark that signals, now the time has come. Everything that had been cultivated in silence, every test endured, every truth integrated along the way, was now set alight with purpose. In that instant, the years of hidden preparation and the lifetimes of spiritual refinement aligned perfectly with the mission ahead. Such ignition changes everything. It doesn't add something new, it awakens what has always been there, waiting for the precise moment to emerge. That is why, from this point forward, his actions carried an unshakable authority. It wasn't authority imposed from the outside, but the natural force of someone whose inner alignment was complete. Every word he spoke would now carry the weight of lived truth. Every gesture would be infused with the clarity of a mind, heart, and spirit moving in perfect harmony. The hidden truth here is that this kind of ignition is not exclusive to one figure in history. It is the culmination of a process that any soul can undergo, a process that begins with the willingness to prepare long before the moment arrives. Behind the scenes, the transformation is slow, often invisible, but when the alignment clicks into place, the shift is undeniable. And from that moment, life stops being a series of disconnected events and becomes a continuous flow of purpose. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding what ignition truly means, not as a metaphor, but as a lived, soul-level experience, opens the door to realizing how such a moment can redefine the entire trajectory of a life. Put down, this makes sense to me. When Cayce spoke of Jesus, he made it clear that his life was not meant to stand as an unattainable exception, but as a living demonstration of what is possible for every soul willing to walk the path. Jesus embodied a potential that exists within all of us, the capacity to align fully with our divine nature, to live in harmony with a purpose that transcends personal ambition. His journey was not designed to create distance between himself and humanity, but to serve as a model of what spiritual embodiment truly looks like in action. This is where the so-called lost years take on a deeper significance. They are not a void in the record, but a hidden map, a blueprint for transformation that unfolds far from the public eye. In these years, we see the pattern of humility, the discipline of service, and the courage to let go of what no longer serves the higher calling. The inner work he undertook was not glamorous. It required solitude, surrender, and a willingness to face truths that most avoid. But that is precisely why it became the foundation of everything that followed. The idea of cosmic remembering that Cayce described adds yet another layer to this blueprint. It suggests that spiritual growth is not always about acquiring something new, but about uncovering what has been within us all along. For Jesus, these years were about peeling back the layers of forgetfulness, the conditioning, the inherited beliefs, the limitations of the human experience, until the full light of the Christ consciousness could shine unobstructed. This remembering is not passive. It demands conscious engagement, a readiness to be reshaped, and the mindset to persist through periods where the outer world offers no recognition or validation. Behind the scenes of his public ministry, this was the real work, aligning every thought, word, and action with the truth of who he was. And that is the essence of why his life serves as a pattern, rather than a pedestal. Anyone can walk the steps of humility, service, and realignment. Anyone can choose to remember. The process will look different for each person, but the underlying principles remain the same: commitment, integrity, and a willingness to be transformed from the inside out. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because when we begin to see these years not as a mystery to be solved, but as a roadmap to be followed, it changes the way we understand both his journey and our own. Put down, I'm also on this path. The silence that surrounds these years is not accidental. it mirrors a deeper pattern in how humanity treats its most profound figures. Over time, we tend to compress their stories into neat symbols, polished for tradition but stripped of the raw, lived depth that made them transformative in the first place. In doing so, we turn vibrant lives into static icons, easier to venerate but harder to relate to. The cost of this is that we lose sight of the human journey, the choices, the doubts, and the deliberate steps that built the strength behind the message. Edgar Cayce's readings disrupt that pattern. They pull back the veil just enough to show that these years were not a void, but an unfolding. His insights affirm what deep intuition has always whispered to those who are willing to listen, that silence in the record does not mean absence of meaning. In fact, it often signals the opposite, that what happened was so foundational, so sacred, it was protected from distortion until the right moment. This perspective reframes the missing years as a living reality rather than a historical gap. If you've ever felt that the official narrative of a great life left you with more questions than answers, it's because part of you senses the hidden truth, that no one arrives at their purpose fully formed. They live it into being. For Jesus, this meant walking paths that the scriptures chose not to document, yet which shaped the very heart of his mission. The wisdom of the East, the discipline of Egypt, the moral clarity of Persia, all of it quietly alive in his teachings, even if unmentioned by name. Behind the scenes of recorded history, this is how purpose is built, in the spaces no one writes about, through decisions and experiences that rarely make their way into public memory. And perhaps this is why Cayce's revelations resonate so deeply, because they speak to a truth we already carry within us. We know that the seasons of silence in our own lives are rarely empty. They are often when the deepest realignment takes place. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because if we can understand why those years were lived but left unspoken, we can begin to see how the most powerful transformations often happen beyond the reach of public eyes, and why that may be exactly how they are meant to unfold. Put down. This makes sense to me. When Jesus returned from those unrecorded years, he did not arrive with the trappings of political power or the noise of public spectacle. What he carried back was far more compelling, a presence shaped in silence, refined through trial, and grounded in a depth that needed no outward display to be felt. It was the kind of presence that could still a crowd without raising a voice, that could shift the atmosphere of a room simply by being there. This wasn't charisma in the worldly sense. It was the natural authority of someone who had faced himself completely and emerged whole. That presence was the real fruit of his journey. It was forged in temples where he learned the inner disciplines of thought and spirit, on roads where humility was his constant companion, and in moments of obscurity where the only witness to his transformation was the divine itself. Power can be given or taken away, but presence like this is earned, the direct result of alignment between who you are and the truth you serve. Yet the very idea that Jesus may have sought wisdom beyond the borders of Judea meets resistance even today. For some, it is not the evidence that troubles them, but the implications. If the Son of God himself traveled, studied, and learned from traditions outside his own culture, then truth cannot be confined to one nation, one scripture, or one lineage. That thought can be unsettling because it demands a shift in mindset, away from exclusivity and toward the recognition that the divine speaks through many voices across time and geography. This is the hidden truth behind the resistance. Acknowledging such a journey challenges the narratives we have grown comfortable with. It asks us to see Jesus not only as a divine figure, but as a dedicated seeker, willing to walk into the unknown for the sake of becoming who he was meant to be. And if we accept that, then we must also accept that the path to alignment is open to all of us, but it will likely lead us beyond the familiar, just as it did for him. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because exploring why this possibility provokes such strong reactions reveals not only how we view spiritual authority, but also how we define the boundaries of our own search for truth. Put down, I'm also on this path. If truth is not bound by geography or lineage, then the search for it becomes an act of both humility and courage. Humility, because it requires acknowledging that no single tradition holds the entirety of the divine message. Courage, because stepping beyond the borders of what is familiar often means leaving behind the safety of what others expect you to believe. For a seeker, and for Jesus himself, as Cayce's readings suggest, this openness is not a betrayal of origin, but a deepening of it. It's the realization that truth, like light, is not diminished by shining through many windows. This perspective invites a shift in mindset. Instead of seeing spiritual paths as competing, it challenges us to view them as complementary threads in a greater tapestry. It means the divine can be encountered in the sacred chants of the East, the initiation chambers of Egypt, the philosophical teachings of Persia, and still speak in harmony with the traditions of Judea. To accept that is to accept that the soul's journey may carry us far from home in order to bring us closer to the essence of home itself. Cayce's work was never about replacing the gospel or tearing down what Scripture holds. His readings were about filling the spaces between the words with what he called soul memory, those deeper impressions that survive beyond a single lifetime, carrying forward the wisdom of many experiences. In this way, his revelations were not rigid doctrines but contours, sketches of a larger picture, allowing each listener to sense the living reality behind the written story. Behind the scenes of theology and history, this approach changes everything. It moves us from memorizing a fixed narrative to engaging with a living one. It means that the figure we meet in the Gospels did not appear in a vacuum, but emerged from a lifetime, and lifetimes, of seeking, integrating, and embodying truth in all its forms. It suggests that the missing years are not just missing from the record, they are missing from our understanding of what it really takes to live in full alignment with the divine. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic because recognizing the difference between rewriting a story and restoring what was left unspoken opens the door to a far richer, more transformative view of what Jesus' journey can teach us today. Put down, this makes sense to me. Cayce's perspective strips away the assumption that Jesus simply stepped into his role by virtue of birthright. He emphasizes that becoming the Christ was not an automatic inheritance, but the result of a journey marked by trials, discipline, and surrender. Every challenge, every decision, every period of solitude was part of aligning his mind, heart, and spirit into a singular purpose. This wasn't about accumulating external signs of authority, it was about refining the inner vessel until it could hold and express the fullness of divine awareness without distortion. To see Christ not as a person, but as a consciousness changes everything. It shifts the focus from worshiping an unattainable figure to recognizing a state of being that can, in principle, be embodied by anyone willing to walk the path. Christ consciousness is the awareness of unity with the divine, the lived reality of compassion, truth, and unconditional love. It is not tied to a name, a culture, or a moment in history, but to the alignment of the human self with the eternal source. This reframing invites us to think differently about transformation. If Jesus reached that state through alignment, then it means such alignment is not beyond our reach, though it comes at a cost. It requires the courage to face our own unhealed places, the humility to release what does not serve the higher calling, and the patience to allow the process to unfold over time. It's not achieved through shortcuts or surface-level change, but through the slow, deliberate shaping of every part of one's being until thought, feeling, and action are in complete harmony with the truth. Behind the scenes, this is the hidden truth of spiritual impact. It isn't charisma, intellect, or even faith alone that creates lasting influence. It's the consistency of living in that state of consciousness, moment after moment, regardless of external circumstances. For Jesus, the missing years were the workshop where this state was forged. They were the time in which the raw materials of his humanity were transformed into the living embodiment of divine awareness. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding Christ consciousness, not as a title, but as a lived frequency opens the door to exploring how such a state can be cultivated, and what it demands from those who seek it. Put down, I'm also on this path. Cayce's descriptions of these revelations came from a place far removed from ego or personal agenda. He entered what he called a prayerful, egoless trance, approaching each session with reverence, as though he were stepping into a sacred space where truth could be received rather than manufactured. This was not about challenging tradition for the sake of rebellion, but about surrendering to a flow of insight anchored in love, a love vast enough to hold multiple perspectives without the need to declare one supreme over all others. That love, as Cayce presented it, does not draw hard borders between spiritual paths. Instead, it sees each tradition, each set of practices, each sacred story as another step toward the same source. It's a perspective that refuses to diminish one path in order to elevate another. Rather, it recognizes diversity as a sign of the divine's infinite creativity in guiding humanity back to itself. This is a truth that can be deeply uncomfortable for those attached to exclusivity, yet it carries a liberating clarity. The ultimate destination is the same, even if the roads we take appear vastly different. Such a view requires a shift in mindset. It asks us to look beyond the surface forms, the languages, rituals, and doctrines, and feel for the current running beneath them. This is where transformation happens, when we realize that what unites these paths is greater than what divides them. It's a way of seeing that dissolves competition between traditions and instead invites curiosity, humility, and mutual respect. Behind the scenes of history, this perspective helps us understand why Jesus' own preparation spanned multiple lands and teachings. His journey was not about collecting pieces from different beliefs to create something entirely new. It was about recognizing the golden thread that already ran through them all. In living that truth, he embodied the unity that love makes possible, a unity that is inclusive without being diluted, expansive without losing depth. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because embracing love as the lens through which all spiritual paths are honored changes not only how we see others, but also how we walk our own journey. Put down, this makes sense to me. Through the breadth of his journey, Jesus came to understand something profound. That truth is not confined to a single expression. It wears many faces, speaks in many tongues, and yet, when genuine, it is always recognized by the heart. This realization reshaped how he saw the world and how he would one day teach. It wasn't enough for truth to be correct. It had to be alive, compassionate, and transformative. Alongside this, he learned that power without compassion is an empty shell, incapable of truly uplifting or healing. Likewise, wisdom untempered by humility becomes pride, a distortion that blinds rather than illuminates. These lessons were not learned in theory alone, but in the lived reality of his travels. In temples, marketplaces, deserts, and quiet mountain retreats, he witnessed both the beauty and the failings of human nature. And in that observation, he also saw himself reflected. He was not immune to the inner tensions that come with a great calling. Cayce's accounts make it clear that Jesus experienced questions that weighed heavily, longings that ached quietly, and moments where fear was a very real presence. His faith was not a static shield against these experiences, but a compass he continually chose to follow, even when the path was unclear. This humanity is what makes his journey so relatable. Behind the scenes of the figure history reveres, there was a man learning to navigate the same emotional and spiritual landscapes we all face. The difference was in his decisions: to meet uncertainty with trust, to respond to fear with surrender, to let longing deepen his alignment rather than pull him from it. This is the hidden truth. Spiritual mastery is not the absence of struggle, but the willingness to face it fully without losing sight of the greater purpose. By embracing both the divine calling and the human challenges, he modeled a mindset that refuses to separate the sacred from the real. His life shows that transformation is forged in the interplay between the two, the moments of clarity and the moments of doubt, the strength to act and the humility to listen. It's in this space that presence, wisdom, and compassion are born. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because understanding that even Jesus' path was shaped by questions and vulnerability reveals a far more empowering truth about what it means to grow into alignment with the divine. Put down, I'm also on this path. When Jesus finally stepped into the public eye, it was not the sudden ignition of something new, but the crystallization of a process that had been shaping him across lifetimes. Those 18 so-called lost years were not idle or incidental. They were the final refining of a soul that had been preparing for ages. Every trial, every teaching, every moment of solitude had settled into place like pieces of a mosaic, forming a complete picture ready to be revealed. His emergence was simply the moment when the work that had been done in silence could no longer be contained. This is why his mission carried such undeniable weight from the very beginning. It wasn't born out of impulse or chance, it was the natural result of alignment so deep that every word, every gesture, was an expression of the truth he had come to embody. What people felt in his presence wasn't the charisma of a leader trying to convince them. It was the steady resonance of someone who had already lived the principles he taught. That kind of impact doesn't happen overnight. It's the fruit of patient transformation, shaped by both divine guidance and personal choice. Cayce's perspective invites us to see those silent years not as empty space in the record, but as sacred ground. They remind us that periods of apparent stillness are often the most fertile, where the roots grow deep enough to sustain whatever is to come. In our own lives, we often mistake these pauses for stagnation, wondering why nothing seems to be moving forward. But if we look closer, we might find that something profound is happening. Beneath the surface, a reorientation of the heart, a strengthening of the spirit, a subtle alignment that will define everything that follows. The hidden truth is that the greatest shifts rarely announce themselves in real time. They happen quietly, in the background, until one day you find yourself stepping into a moment you are perfectly prepared for. Just as Jesus' preparation was unseen by most, so too the deepest work in our own lives often takes place away from public view. And when that season ends, it doesn't feel like the start of something unfamiliar. It feels like becoming what you were always meant to be. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic, because recognizing the value of silence and unseen preparation changes the way we experience our own journeys, revealing that even in stillness, we may be moving toward the most transformative chapters of our lives. Put down, this makes sense to me. If you've stayed with me all the way here, I think you already feel the depth and value of what we've uncovered together. That's exactly the kind of journey we keep exploring on this channel, so make sure you're subscribed. It's the best way to keep receiving content that truly adds meaning and perspective to your path. And if this resonated with you, leave a comment saying, "I'm with you until the end," so I know you were here for every step. Go ahead and give this video a like too. It's a simple way to keep this connection alive and help more people find these conversations. And since we've opened so many doors today, there's a video right here that beautifully complements what we've just explored. Click and continue with me over there.